What you are looking at is one of the oldest and first examples of Egyptian art. This comes from what we call the pre-dynastic period, so before the establishment of the continuing families of pharaohs that ruled Egypt for the next almost 3,000 years. We are looking at the very dawn of that era of rule. This is a reconstruction, a watercolor reconstruction of a tomb painting from a tomb of an early Egyptian leader. And what you are looking at is something that should appear familiar to you. This looks very similar to Sumerian art. In fact, this is contemporary to a lot of the Sumerian art that you have already seen. If you remember the Warka vase, which is around 3200 or so BCE, so this is contemporary with that object. And if you look closely, you can see there are some very similar strategies to Sumerian art. Look down here at sort of the lower left, or sort of center lower left, and you will see there is that heraldic figure. We have a figure holding two strong animals, in this case it looks like bulls, at bay. If you look around here, what we are looking at is an image of battle. We're not exactly sure what this is, if this is a real battle, if this is a mythological battle. This might have been between these pre-dynastic Egyptian people and people from the Mesopotamian era. We don't know. We also might be looking at a burial, at some funerary barges taking the body to its final resting place. Funerary is, once again, relates to funerals or a religious culture centered on death. And in many ways, the style, these sort of very simple geometric shapes used for the figures, the triangular shaped bodies, the large eye on the side of the head in this sort of composite figure is something that should look very familiar to you, and we have seen since, the ancient Sumerians, and this is contemporary with that. So what this is telling us that there was a lot of interaction between the Mesopotamian cultures and Egyptian culture. Our next image will look a lot more Egyptian to you. One of the reasons for this is the use of registers. We often associate these sort of strict, structured imagery with ancient Egypt, and that is something we are certainly seeing here. These registers, these bands, remember, are used to help tell the story in much the same way that a modern comic book tells a story. You are looking at a fascinating image, an image, once again, that sort of blurs the line between myth and history. We're not exactly sure if this commemorates 100% real events or this is more sort of a myth, but you are looking at sort of a foundational event in Egyptian history, the creation, the unification of Egypt by a guy named Narmer, who is considered to be the first pharaoh, a man who brings together the areas of Upper and Lower Egypt. So let's take a little bit closer look. So this is a palette. A palette is a device you use to mix pigments on. Painters use palettes. This is a makeup palette. Although it was probably never used as an actual makeup palette to mix makeup, but was instead used as a ceremonial object. Egyptians wore eye makeup as part of their sort of religious faith and also as a sign of their various ruling classes would wear eye makeup. This probably originated from a very practical use of makeup to reduce the glare from the heat and light of the desert, in much the same way that a ball player will put a grease on their cheekbones. This probably evolved from that. So what we are looking at here is Narmer, this pharaoh. You can see him in the center of the palette here, on the back of the palette. Narmer is being associated with the god Horus, who is associated with the living god of the pharaoh. Remember, the pharaoh is seen as a god, or at least sort of a demigod on earth. When he dies, then he becomes sort of a full god. But right now he is associated with Horus, the sort of protector god of the pharaoh on earth. And if you look closely, you can see in the pharaoh's hand is a scepter. Uh, in his other hand, he is holding the body of his enemy, and he is about to hit this guy in the head. So what we are looking at is a military victory. This unification, whether if we're looking at a sort of a mythological or a historical account of it, it was a unification through violence, or at least it was depicted here as a unification through violence. We can see Narmer is wearing the crown of Upper Egypt, this sort of bowling pin. And then above him we have an image of the goddess Hathor, who is also associated with pharaohs. Mythologically, her milk provides sustenance for the pharaohs. And then we see, once again, Horus, this falcon god, this pharaoh, protector of the pharaoh, holding this figure, this odd sort of hybrid of man and plant, representing Lower Egypt. Lower Egypt is associated with the papyrus plant, and so we see this sort of papyrus bush man hybrid under the being held by Horus. So once again, as another symbol of victory of Narmer over his enemy, the people of Lower Egypt. At the very bottom, we see more images of people being conquered. These are fully nude. We've talked about this before. Naked equals shame. In a lot of ancient Mesopotamian and Egyptian and Mediterranean art. Not always, but in a lot of cases, and especially in images of war or battle. Let's take a look at the other side. You'll see at the top, in fact, this is at the top of both palettes, is a symbol of Narmer. So we know that this is meant to commemorate his victory. This is the first labeled work of art. This is the first work of art that we know what it's about explicitly, because it tells us who it's for. If we look below that top register, we can see the another register of a battlefield, a register depicting a battlefield. We see Narmer using hieratic scale, so he is bigger than everybody else because he's most important. He's wearing the crown of Lower Egypt, so on the other side we saw him with the crown of Upper Egypt, so this is meant to show his rule over both kingdoms now. We see these smaller standard bearers. No, they're not hobbits. They're not monumentally short. They're just not as important as the pharaoh, so they are shown as being small. And then we see, once again, the idea that this is a violent victory. And if you look over here to the left, I've blown it up. You can see the people of Lower Egypt been decapitated, his enemies have been vanquished, and their heads have been placed between their legs. So this is, once again, a symbol of his victory. Below that, we see these two hybrid creatures that are made up of lions and serpents being held together by these servants of Narmer. Once again, the two beasts are meant to symbolize Upper and Lower Egypt being tamed, being controlled, and being unified in sort of this circle of unity. But also, this circle is where the makeup would have been mixed had this actually been used for makeup. At the very bottom, we see another image of a bull, a powerful animal, trampling over its naked, vanquished enemy. You know, this is an ancient symbol once again. We have seen bulls all the way back to Paleolithic times. We have seen them all over ancient Sumer, other cultures in ancient Mesopotamia as a symbol of power, of male power, of virility, of strength, of, a power animal. So, with these images of the gods, this should be familiar to you because what is happening is that the presence of Horus, the presence of Hathor, are sort of justifying Narmer's victory. It is one thing for a king to rule over somebody else or to conquer them in battle because they want to, but it is another thing if the gods have either demanded it or approved of it. They have sanctified it, and so this is what these gods, Horus and Hathor, are doing here. They are approving of Narmer's victory. In fact, they have probably commanded Narmer's victory. So this is a divine victory as declared and approved for by the gods.